Going green so that we can start exactly on the hour with our live streaming and with our link there. So give me one moment. Today it is really the Gabe show. So I'm excited to be hosting it. Gabe Green will be walking through step by step. Gabe, what URL are you using so that we can share it out with everybody who's joining with us?
Oh, sure. Send that out. So I'm using the data integration tutorial that IBM has available. And here is that link. Did that send out? Well, you have it, but I can send that out to everybody. There we go.
Nice. So if you're joining us, these will be the step instructions that Gabe's going to go over so you can follow along. And with that, really, Gabe, we're live, we're ready to go. Is there anything else you need from me before we kick it off?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, Gabe, go ahead, share your screen and we'll get started.
All right. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. And so here's what we'll be doing, right? So the link that I sent out is IBM's Cloud Pack for Data. That's the system we'll be using. I'm gonna sort of jump into right into some areas and not do a general covering of what's Cloud Pack for Data, what are the services, and so on, unless I have time at the end. But we covered that sort of the last session, so I'll just assume that we are good. That said, let me open the chat here. I don't know if we have how many people we'll have here, but certainly if anyone is here, if I see any questions pop in, um, then I will do my best to answer them. Otherwise, we'll keep this sort of informal and I'll just walk through the process here. So what I'm going to show is I have a demo Cloud Pack for Data environment. If you look at the URL, technically this is running in IBM's cloud. It's using a managed OpenShift environment, but this is the software version of Cloud Pack for Data, and the documentation that I sent is the software version for Cloud Pack for Data. I'm running the latest version, which is a 5.1, and that's what you see running here. At the beginning here, this is just a home page for Cloud Pack for Data. I'm logged in with an account that has full capabilities. It's an administrator account, so I can see everything, which is why the home screen has alerts and notifications and everything related to the services I have installed. That said, we will now walk through. I'm going to move this tutorial to my other screen so that you won't see it, but you have the link if you want to follow along. There is actually already IBM provides a video, so you can walk through the video portion that they recorded. We'll be doing just the same steps. So move that over. Okay. And move that over. I will do my best to catch any questions if they do appear in the chat. Okay, but that said, oops, maybe I will do my best to, there we go. Okay, I think I'm good. All right, so in the steps, so I'm going to skip the tips to completing. Just kind of talks about what we'll be doing, and I'm not going to set up a separate user and role. You absolutely can, and so they have you walk through and set up a user with a data engineer role. If you have the ability to do that, and want to create one, you can. Um, there's in the 5.1 version, which is what we're using, some of that is separate. You have what's called a hub, a software hub. And so things are divided a little bit. Not sure if the tutorial does divide those out, but that's how 5.1 now has sort of a common software hub, which becomes the center point for doing a lot of the monitoring and integration to security providers, and even adding users into the environment depending on the provider and so on. So we're in the Cloud Pak for Data side. But if I had some of the Watson X and so on here, it would actually, I'd see maybe additional links and I could jump to the different uh, platform home screens. But I'm going to remain here in Cloud Pak for Data. Now that prerequisite page does have the portion I'm going to start at. I'm going to leave out the user. Portion I'm going to start at is where it says create a sample project. And there is a zip file, which is a project export that they have you download. And so once you have that downloaded, what you can do is create a project. You can create a project in the what's called the global navigation menu, or sometimes referred to as the hamburger menu because it looks like a hamburger. You can navigate depending on your permissions. You will see in what you have available to you inside the software version, or as services, what you have provisioned as the managed services on IBM Cloud if you're using that. Now that's slightly different. So the import of the projects is depends on the version. So the software version or the SaaS version. But what you'll see more or less depending on your permissions and who you're logged in as. I'm going to go to the projects section. And here, then you'll see I do have some other projects and some look familiar. Some are from additional tutorials. And if you look at that link, there are other tutorials that are available to you that you can navigate. And if you're not familiar or you want a refresher as to what the newer versions of Cloud Pak for Data Services can do, I'd walk through those. They're detailed and have a lot of steps in them that can help you out. So I'm going to take that data integration zip that I just downloaded. I'm going to do a new project, right? And they have you name it data integration. You can really copy and paste from the guidelines there, the step by step. So I'll call it data integration, and I'll just leave it called that. Now, when you do that, you'll see you've got some advanced settings and so on. They don't really cover it in the tutorial, but you can take a look at these. So reporting on metadata assets, you can set that as on a platform level. You can say, hey, here are the defaults. The default normally is off for that. What this allows you to do is actually if you're doing a centralized Postgres database for synchronizing the asset information, and this would actually synchronize the new project called data integration would appear in the underlying database tables for the reporting catalog database, and I would see the information with it, depending on what I add. Mark is sensitive. This prevents you from doing certain things, right? So sandbox environment is what a project is for users that are able to use different services to go in and do things. So you can mark as sensitive if that project will contain assets, and you want to be very careful if those assets are published in any other way. You have certain services where you can do things like create dashboards that you might present to other users. You might export data into catalogs for users now to view and see information about the asset, data quality, uh, business terms that have been assigned, governance associations to assets and artifacts within. And you might want to mark it as sensitive so that to prevent the user from accidentally publishing something that that project contains only sensitive information that you got to be very careful no other users can see. And you can log all activities. If you set this by default, then it's going to log everything users are doing within. I'm going to leave those alone. And then you'll see on the side here, you can integrate the project entirely with Git. That restricts services to only those that are compliant with Git integration. And of course, you have to have, if I click on that, you can do default Git integration. So as long as it's Git based, you can connect to it. I'm going to do local file. I'm going to browse, and then I'm going to go to downloads and move that in. Okay, and I click on cancel because of the way I moved that in. But so now I've got my data integration zip. The name is data integration. I could set additional tags. Tags are like sticky labels, right? That you can use those to later to identify and find in search, right? So you can use the search to actually search on tags. You can use the tags additionally, depending on their artifact style. You might apply policies to them inside Cloud Platform Data and so on. I'm going to click create. And so now what it'll do is create that project, and it's going to initially seed that project from the zip that was a previous export from the project. And that allows you to sort of port project information around or back it up if you wanted to store the project information on your own somewhere. All right, so now I can view the project. And you'll see in the prereq steps, once it has you do this, it does say, has you click on the assets and verify that the assets come in. But you'll see there's a project README that was there. I can see the project history here. I can see a few other things depending on the services. You get some tabs at the top. It actually has you click on the assets tab so you can view the assets within the project. Right, and I can filter on asset types and so on. When you do this, right, so I am CP admin is my user, right? So if I click here, I can see that that's who I am. Yours will be different. If I click on manage because I created the project, you'll see different tabs depending on the services you have available to you. You'll have different project level management you can do. Initially coming in, right? So if I click on access control, I'm the admin of the project. I created the project, so I become the admin. Here's where I could add additional users or user groups and give them certain roles, which assign certain capabilities within the project. So here's the four different assets within the project, and we'll be using those later. And so now on task one, so that's the end of the prereq for the, let me move this over, create the sample project section, and I think that's in the prereqs. It's not really a task number associated, just called prereqs. Set up the prerequisites. So now we're on task one. So for task one, what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at a DataStage flow. So you'll see there is a flow here called data integration, right? And I can filter on flows, right? And so flows right now is DataStage flows. I could have pipelines would show there as well. And I'm not sure if this project has you look at it, but Watson pipelines are for the orchestration of organizing flows. So the data integration task is specific to moving and transforming data potentially from between sources and targets. And so that's DataStage. But then you might do other things, and in Cloud Pak for Data, you can integrate really a variety of services and capabilities. And so I might decide, hey, I want to orchestrate a flow, and here's the flow. I'm going to run this DataStage flow first. It's going to move data into a target. Then I'm going to execute a Python notebook. Then I'm going to do some sort of a shell script. Then I'm going to execute another DataStage flow. That would be in a pipeline. So, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at the data integration flow. And there were a couple of data sources that it automatically included inside the project, right? So it's ported those along with this project. And so here's what it looks like. You have certain sections, right? So I can zoom in and out, right? So if I zoom in and out, it does what you would expect. I can navigate and arrange things horizontally just if I put them in place and now they're askew and I want to have it just organized for me. If hey, I'm just navigated using dragging and moving the palette around so that we could preview everything. But I can click zoom to fit, and that would organize things as best as it could to fit on the screen. So now we're going to look at has you double click the mortgage applications one, and this is an IBM DB2 warehouse node. And on the palette side, when you're developing, really this is a no-code data integration tool. So there are some sections where I can add some code to do certain things, scripts and so on, but the tutorial doesn't get there. So maybe in the advanced section, which is the next one of the webinars. We can cover some of that. But here in the connectors, you'll see a variety of connectors. So, and many of these serve multiple purposes and can do a variety of things, right? These could be, in some cases, they're only sources, some cases only targets, some cases, in most cases, both. Asset browser is a kind of a nice connector that allows you to, it becomes whatever inside your project, you can navigate to an asset and it becomes whatever connector is appropriate based on what you select. Right, so if I drag that in, and this is going a little off script, but you'll see here's what I have inside the project. And I could say, hey, I've already got a data asset inside the project, or I've got some other DataStage intermediate files. Data sets are a proprietary format of, it's kind of like a Parquet file, but it's pre-existed Parquet files, but it's similar. Right, so it's a format that IBM uses to where you can store the data locally inside this compressed file, and it retains a schema with it. And now I can use that data somewhere else. Right, so I can go from flow 1 to flow 2, flow 2 to flow 3, and so on. I could have file sets. I could use a persistent volume, and I know I've got some data that's stored there too. I can have subflows that return data depending on what they do. I have connections here. And so within, right, this is kind of what you would typically do is you'd have a connection and you say, okay, on that connection, in this case, the DB2 data warehouse, I want to navigate now from that connection into a schema that I have available to me based on how that connection is established and the permissions of the credentials that are used. And then I could go into a specific schema and say, okay, based on that, what I have access to. And now I could say, okay, I care about the mortgage applicant table. Let me bring that in. In this case, I clicked on cancel because we already have the asset here. I'm going to double click it. And now you'll see information or properties that are specific to that connector type. And so within that stage, each one of the stages has their own properties. That's what allows you to flexibly configure these and purpose them to what you need. And so here with mortgage applicants one, that's a default name. I could change that name. Right, so it has you go to the properties and actually preview the data. So depending on the connector type, you can actually go, okay, I've got things set, but I'm not familiar with the data. Maybe somebody else created this. Maybe you just need a refresher as to what the data is within, or maybe you want to make sure you've got all the connection information set properly. If I click on preview data, it does a translated preview, meaning within Cloud Pack for Data and the services within, what occurs is it will convert some of the types. It'll make them a nicer presentation, give me some additional information. And so the preview has, it's kind of like a nice little mini reporting tool. So I can see the different columns. I can sort them, reorganize a few things. I can search on values. I see the total number of rows based on what it returned, the total number of columns. I can navigate the pages based on how I have this set. All right, so there's 419, so I have 5 pages right now, but I could modify that. I can also look at, and that's what they have you do in the tutorial, right? So we're previewing, and then it says to click on the chart pane. So when I do that, right, so now I can actually visualize some of my data. So I might want to spot check the data depending on what I'm doing inside the flow. And so they have you click on columns to visualize a state. So let's do that. Mortgage applicants one. Maybe I clicked on the wrong one, did I? Oh, I did. I clicked on applications. And click on mortgage applicants one. Okay. So now let's preview that data. I guess they did have you click on applications, but only preview. So here, same, so now 14 columns and so on. I'm going to click on chart, and they have you navigate to state, and then click on visualize data. Right. And so you get a default chart type here. They had you click on the tree map. Let's do that. Right. But now I can flexibly go in and sort of navigate around, create a little mini chart here, view things quickly, right? Get counts. So now I can really get a feel for, it's sampling data, sure, but I can get a feel for what my data looks like inside this table before I use it. So I'm going to click close. Right. And then step number 8. So that was step number 7. Step number 8 in that task is then double click on the join ID, right? So you have connector types inside the palette. You also have stages, right? So this is what gives you the power within DataStage. And this allows you to perform actions, right? So I can do transformations, I can organize data, I can join data together. And so when I navigate down, that is what was done here, right? So you can see that icon matches. This is a join type. And so what I'll do is I'll double click on the join on ID, and I can see, so the icon, of course, matches and the icons are unique. Sometimes they're similar, so you can see the type. So that's a join stage. And so then they have you view the properties here, and you can see the join key that was already selected was ID. The join type is enter, right? But if you're familiar with SQL, then these are the different join types. And it works the same way. So inner is going to restrict the output to only where there's a match between the two sources here, mortgage applications and applicants on ID. Okay, so now it has you, so let's see, we click cancel and it has me click on the logs. Right, and so I can see, what's occurred so far. And right now I don't have anything because I haven't run the flow. So I could click run flow here. I could click on the actions here. So everything in DataStage, it's a compiled C code, right? So there's a C compiler that actually compiles this so that it's natively executable and runs very quickly. I could click on save if I make changes, then compile, then run. Or it'll figure it out for me if I click on run and there's any changes, it would save it by default. There's some preferences for that, but it would save it by default and then say, hey, I need to compile it because there's changes, and then compile it and then run it. So it has you click on compile and then run, but really you can do just run. Right, and so now I've got a couple of sections here, and it has you view the logs after the run. If I click on the run metrics, then I can also see, depending on your settings, you can also get run metrics, which tell you about the different sections of your job. Give you like rows written, read, throughput, overall. And then you can also click on, you'll get different sections, right? So I can filter on different sections, and then I would see them if I'm trapping the metrics. And there you go, right? So took it a second to appear, but now I'm seeing the different sections, right? And so you get counters and you get metrics per. And so you can do things like see, okay, well, where did I spend the majority of the time in my job? Do I need to look at something to fix that? If it didn't run the way that I needed to run. If I click on logs, close metrics. Now I can see the logs for the job. Okay. And you can preview the job logs if you want to do. If you saw any errors, you could highlight those errors. I can copy this out. I can download it. I can expand it and so on. All right. I can minimize the palette so I get a little more room here too. Right. And you can see everything, like including it will generate a SQL statement. And you can see, okay, well, what's it doing? Like, how is it running a SQL statement to retrieve my data? right? And if I want, I can wrap it because that might make it a little easier than navigating. You can see some of these lines get quite long. But so now it has you close the logs and double click the okay, so it has you go to the ESSA step. So it I didn't see logs run and so on. I apologize, I'm following along here at the same time. The sequential file is what it's writing to, right? So you can see 69 rows wrote to a sequential file as a connector stage. Now, the way that works is I'll have, and I'm going to close that little notification. But the way this works is if I click on the input properties, I can see this is what it's calling the output file. And I didn't specify where to put it. I just said file system, and here you go. Now, this check mark says, okay, and now what I want to do is when I create this file, I want you to put it back out as an asset available inside the project. And I might do something else with it at that point. Or maybe I just have it there so the next time somebody goes in, they have that asset just sitting there waiting and they can view that CSV or use it in something else later. You can see it's set to overwrite each time. So now if I go back to, right, and so I'll save that little icon indicated, hey, you've got a change that I don't think is saved, and so I'll save it. But if I go back to the data integration project, then now we should see a brand new, instead of 4 total assets, we'll see 5. Right, so we have 5 total assets. And here's a new one created 3 minutes ago, which is our CSV file. Now, if I click on this, right, same sort of a preview that we had inside the DataStage flow, everything looks, feels, acts, right? The services are common. The UIs are created so that they're all effectively the same, right? Different capabilities, but the look and the feel and the style, all the same. And what that does is that gives you a single consolidated UI that once you get used to using, you know how to use it everywhere. So some of the stuff would, depending on the data type, might be translated into a different value, right? If it thinks it's a date, it'll format and display it as a date. Right, so now I can preview what that looks like, that CSV that was created through that join process. Now you'll see a couple of different tabs here that weren't on our previous preview pane. Right, so I see the number of columns and I see, it sampled this many rows, and that's the total number of rows. I could refresh it if I thought something changed and my preview pane was still here and hadn't updated. It tells me, how long ago did you refresh this? Download it and so on. So a lot of capabilities, but additionally, I could say, okay, I want you to I'm going to click this and you're going to dynamically do a little profile sample if I want. And it'll do its best. It'll sample those first 5,000 rows, and there are ways you can do a much more detailed, comprehensive profiling. But it'll do things like look at the data within and take its best guess as to what that is, right? And so it'll go like, okay, I think, here are some metrics around it, statistics that I've trapped around the profile. And that'll impact data quality, right? So I can do what's called a metadata enrichment and now take this data and go, okay, I'm going to assign, governance artifacts. I'm going to have you use things like data classes and interrogate the data within based on how I preference you. And you're going to tell me, what does this look like? It looks like a social security number. So now I need to do something around masking or privacy because of that. Or I think it's a social security number, but now I've got 5% of the data that doesn't match a social security pattern, and that's a violation of data quality. So a lot of features within, and the visualization is the same thing we did look at. Right. And there's a comprehensive integration with a variety of machine learning services, and that's what feature group is for. Right. So you can do things like, okay, now I want to create a new feature group that I'm going to use later inside the machine learning model. Click back on data integration, and that's the end of that task. And actually, I think I'm going very slowly here. Let's see, how long did we have here? Enjoy. I don't know if you're still on.
Sorry, Gabe. I was muted and just answering your questions. We are good to keep going. So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. So we have another hour almost, right?
yeah, we're good to keep going and keeping up with your current content. So I'm good.
Okay. All right. So continuing, right? So now we look at there's an overview section, and you can look at that. That kind of says, okay, now that you've joined the data, right? So it tells you where you are. We're going to go to task number 2. So we're going to open that data integration flow again. All right. And you'll see the little, you got a little graphic there that kind of shows you what you'll be doing. And it tells you what you'll be doing, right? So now we're going to specify the key column for the join stage, right? So at this point, we're going to add. So it says, on the assets tab. So we've opened data integration. We got the join on ID. And on the output columns, right? So it has you click on the join on ID. And then within, right? So you have an input, and I've got I could change the names here to make this a little easier to identify what's going in and out, right? So this could be, I could make this the same as the asset name, or it could be a before transformation, or preceding join, or whatever. I'm going to leave it as link 1 or 2. But as you can see, depending on the stage, on the join, I've got at least 2 for an inner join, and I've got link 1 and 2. So I could say, okay, link 1, mortgage applications, contains the following fields. Link 2 contains these fields. On the output though, right? So after the join, what do I want to send out? So it'll default and say, okay, everything between the 2 links on an inner join is going to be included, right? The key column, which was ID in our case, would only be once, because it knows, hey, you're joining in this, and it wouldn't necessarily be the same value. So I'm going to include that column only one time. However, you can go in and edit, right? So in this case, they have you edit so that downstream we can use by default a different key, right? So although ID was the join between the 2 coming into the join, what it's having you do is scroll down and find the email address column and make that a key. All right, so now we'll apply and return, and then click save. And then task 3, right? So then it just has you check your progress. And then task 3 now, we're going to go to the node palette. We're going to select connectors, right? And so here's what does have you use the asset browser, because we have this available inside our project, and we're just going to select it. And so I'm going to add the asset browser. Put it right about there. And then it has you go to the connections and select data fabric trial for Postgres. There you go, that one. And then it has you go to banking, and we're going to select credit score, right? So right here. Now you can see that little icon there that indicates, hey, this is what's called a view inside a database, right? So it does some icon translation so that you can tell what the assets are at a high level here. I'll click select this, right? And now it says, okay, you've selected credit score. Here's a little information about that. So I can take a quick look before I bring it into my project. I'm going to say add. All right, and I could have previewed. That's what they have you do there, but I'm going to navigate through some things here. All right, then task 4 is where we are. And we're going to add a join stage. All right, so similar to the join ID here, now this is a filter stage. And unless I missed it, I don't think it had us click on this. But on a filter stage, this is where you can say, okay, look, on the input, here's what I've got going in. On the output, here's what I have going out. But on the stage, you can say, okay, you can edit, and you can say, here's the code. Effectively, this is like a where clause in the database. So I can say, here's the, on the output link, and it tells you the link type, right, is primary. But on the output link here, here's the where clause I want to include, and you can actually use expressions, right? So depending, right, you can do some things here, but I can say, okay, here are the different things, and then do like a greater than, equal to, less than. It gives you a little bit of here's how you would do it, ands, ors, things like that. So even if this was coming from a file, this is within DataStage. Doesn't matter if the original source database and supports SQL-like where clauses. That's what this looks and feels like. I'll click cancel, right? And you can see a couple of things here where it says, okay, do you want to do things like try to count distinct? Do you want to include things that don't meet your criteria? The default, of course, if you're filtering, is false. And you get things like additional properties. Depending on the stage, you might see more or less there. Right? So I could say output the rows only once, false, right? In this case, no point in doing that. If I had duplicates and I wanted to maybe attempt to resolve the duplicates, I could say true. Output rejects, I could say, you know what, I want to include them anyway, even without the filter, but I want to tag something downstream based on did it meet the filter clause or not. I could use the filter stage maybe I'm reducing the output columns, right? In any case, that's what a filter looks like. So now we have the credit score, right? So we're going to drag in a join stage, right? So I'm going to go to the palette, go to stages, navigate down to join, or filter to join, and drag that in. When I drag it in, it just sort of spliced that in place, right? And so now what I'll do is I'll take the arrow here that tells you, okay, here's the going in, going out, right? So this is how I indicate what flows into what. And so I'm going to take credit score, I'm going to drag it down to the join stage. And so now it says, okay, so this is link 6. I could change that name, right? So then it has you double click the credit score. So it pulled in based on the information that it knew, because it was a Postgres database. It pulled in based on metadata associated what it knows about that table, right? So that what they have you do here is click on outputs, and it pulled in all of the columns for the table by default. And so it's going to have us edit. And if it knew what the keys were, then it would attempt to set the keys. But in this case, it has us take the email address and the credit score and make them keys. Apply and return, and click save. Okay. Then we double click our join one, and I could change that ID, something more pertinent like join on whatever, but I'm going to leave it, right? So we made sure that the email address was a key, and the email address and credit score were keys here. So now I'm going to leave it, let's see, they have you leave, not modify the join type, right? And so I didn't change the name there, but you can say I can change set properties usually many different ways. I'm going to change it here. So it's going to have us join on email and call this join on email. So there you go. I'm going to add a key. Now it's going to, if I add a key, give me a display of the columns that it thinks are that it thinks could be the same and possibly be a join key between the two. And so I'm going to select email address and then apply. You can set, depending on the type of the key, you can also set additional properties like do a case sensitive search between values in a string that would otherwise be case insensitive, and now you want to be careful as to the casing. Right. And so now we have email address as the key, and then it says to click apply and return, and then click save. Okay, so now we're joining the credit score based on the email address. Right, and then task 5 has us add a transformer stage. And so we can navigate through the palette and the stages, or I could filter, right? So there's a transformer stage. But if I just navigate to the stages, then here's a transformer stage. So it has us drag a transformer stage and put it after. Right, and again, it says, okay, you must want this between, and so it takes link 7, makes it the input, and creates a new link as the output from the transformer stage. And within a transformer stage, I can do a variety of things. So what it has you do, right? So we double click transformer stage. And has us go to the output tab. And so you can see by default what it did is said, okay, I'm just going to assume you want to carry things through the transformer stage. Right, but in this case, it has us now add a new column, right? So we click on add column. And so here's the transformer stage, right? I can scroll up or down and so on. And then what I can do is say, I want to add a column. Right, and so by default, just call that column 1. It'll make it unique. So if I add another one, it'll be column 2. Or column 1, if I change this name and it knows column 1 is unique, has us change the column name to total debt. We're going to click on the derivation section, right? And we'll click on the little calculator. Right, and then we're gonna take loan amount from the input columns. Right, and here's loan amount. And if I select it, I could copy it from here. And I can also see some information about it, right? So I can go, okay, here's the information about that input column. Or if I grab on the left-hand side, oops, or double click on the left-hand side, either one. Lots of ways you can get that in there, right? So I copy it, I could move it, I could do a variety of things. But so I had loan amount. Now on the calculations, right? So I can do a variety of things here inside Transformer. Right, so you'll see all sorts of functions to extend your capabilities as far as transformations, including I can create new columns and enhance my data set. You know, whenever I run this job, I want that dynamically to populate a timestamp that I carry inside the database table to indicate how fresh this data is or something. Includes system variables and so on. Right, but what we're going to do is use an operator and just say plus. Right, and so now we're going to add another. So loan amount. Yep, and then credit card debt. Okay. So that's another input column, and I could search for it, right? So I could say, right, so everywhere you can effectively search. And so here's credit card debt, right? So I could, I'll go here and I'll copy it from here, right? Now that didn't copy the full name, right? But that, yeah, which for functions, of course, that works totally fine. For an input column, you have to have the link name in front of it because you could have multiple links feeding in. And so now I've got an indication that, hey, you've got something sort of misformatted here, and it'll tell you. So in our case, right, these two came in as strings, and so it says, hey, wait a minute, and that actually I don't see as part of this inside. Now, depending on the transformation type, you may be totally fine. But what it's telling you is, hey, you're adding two strings together. That might not work. So they don't have this in the tutorial, right? But if I said, okay, that makes sense. Let me try to do an explicit conversion beforehand. And you do have those inside Transformer. I'll just show you those, right? So you can go generically, you can do Certain functions you could type them in once you get to know them. There are type conversion functions. And so I could say, okay, I want to take a character because I see that the type for credit card debt and the other were in varchar. So I could say I want to take a string of the following type, right? Do a string to a decimal. You also get more generic functions in some cases. So I'm going to use a string, and if I click on this, right, I see information about this function, right? And so here I could copy it. And so this absolutely works. So I could say, okay, I want to copy that. And it tells you about the function. Here are the arguments, output types, and so on. Gives you a little example usually. Right, and so I'll do paste that in. And so that's my string, right? So if I said string to number, and then I can just type that in, you can see it's filtering as we go as a code completion, right? Put that around. Now my warning goes away. So could I have been fine? Yeah, I could have been fine. Or you can explicitly control it and you can use that context highlighting and the warnings and code completion and so on to sort of facilitate doing this stuff quickly. And so now I've got total debt. The data type isn't set. And do they have a selected data type? They don't. Okay. So, okay. So let's set the data type. Oh, okay. So it by default, it's saying, hey, I know that's a number, and it defaulted to begin. Now that may not be appropriate. I don't know. We could preview that data to see, okay, let's use the preview to tell us what's in from a character standpoint. It might contain decimals and precisions, and so let's do the following. Right? Or I could pick a data type that I know is going to give me, I could say, okay, make it a double so that I'm covered as far as if this has precision. Or you could set the type more specifically if you know what it should be. But okay, so now I've got the set. Now it has you go to the stage, and so here, right, I've got tabs at the top, and here's where I could reset the name, of course. And so on the stage tab, in a transformer, I have a variety of sections where I can say, okay, I'm actually going to, for ease of downstream, I'm going to create my own intermediate variables. You're going to hold the values based on a derivation that I assigned, and then I'm going to reuse that variable, the value produced in several places. I can do things like create intermediate loopings. So maybe this is coming from text files and they don't do things like support groupings and in certain aggregations, and you can do that inside Transformer. Even things like data warehouses where I'm assigning like a brand new, what's called a surrogate key, or I want to create a database table and I have to assign an ID, but I have to keep track of that and make it unique. And do things like, hey, you create a flat file, which is effectively like a database sequence. Or if I know I've got a database that supports the database sequence, I could do that too. Right. So now, depending on the connector type, I just have to tell it which one has to know that it supports a sequence, and then I identify and use the sequence. Right. And then I can use that within Transformer and say, give me the next surrogate value. Link ordering, right? So depending on what you're doing, as far as like looping and so on, I might have multiple links and I could assign the ordering. And many of the stages support that. And also inside DataStage, you have the concept of what's called parallel execution. So if I click on advanced, and that's what they have you do, the default is, hey, I want to run things in parallel because that gives me typically better performance. There are some times where you might want to override that, and what they have you do is override that, in this case, specifically to set it as sequential. Now, DataStage, when it can, if it knows that, hey, the stage, like I'm reading, from a text file, the default is, well, I'm going to read from that text file one time. And so it'll read sequentially and then decide how to distribute that data. And you can control some of that, but it does really all of that for you automatically. If I do sequential here, it'll say, okay, if my next stage can be done in parallel and the default is parallel, I'm going to distribute after. And you can make decisions as to how that's done. But if I say execution mode is sequential and then say save and return, how you can tell the indication of the little icon you've got on the link that shows a circle here indicates, hey, I'm auto partition, I'm going to leave it alone, but I'm running in parallel. If the flow indicates, hey, that fan in icon indicates I was in parallel coming into this stage, but it's executing sequentially, so everything's coming out sequential. Everything's coming out of parallel here, and this, sorry, and the input of this transformer stage is sequential. So now what it has to do is gather those together, and on one of the parallel executions, one of the partitions that it creates to execute this flow, what it's going to do is bring that data together, run it into transformer so that it can run sequentially, and then run out. And the fact that it's got no change here, right? I don't see any other additional icon is means the sequential stage, which is writing to in this case a CSV file, is going to write sequentially as well. So it's not going to change it at that point. Transform sequential. My downstream is sequential, so I'm going to leave it alone, which is the way you would do it if you were setting this yourself, right? Okay. So now it has us. Let's see. So now checking the progress, right? We've added a new transformer stage. We're moving to the sequential file. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to go to add an interest rate. And I'm moving quickly. I took too long talking too much. So I'm going to try to move a little faster here. So now it has us add an interest rate from a MongoDB database, right? So MongoDB, that's a NoSQL database, but DataStage facilitates, or Cloud Piper Data rather, facilitates connecting and reading from certain sources that otherwise would be difficult to run a query against, right? So what we're going to do is retrieve data from MongoDB. So we're going to go to connectors, and we're going to add that same, we're going to use that same asset browser. Now, there are the connectors are down here, right? So I could find MongoDB and specifically add it and select as well. But I'm going to cheat and use the asset browser. Right, and so the connection here allow me to select, and here's MongoDB. MongoDB has collections of documents, and so here I can see document. And I'll grab the interest rates and add that in. Okay, so now we've added the interest rate. And so now we're going to add what's called a lookup. And so a lookup will not on a join, right? That's going to facilitate in the case of an inner join. What'll happen is it'll restrict the output rows to only where there's a match based on the key we set. So a lookup allows you to take typically what's a smaller set of translated values or a lookup based on some sort of a code from a smaller data set, right? So I'm going to take all the records here in the main data set. I'm going to look something up from a smaller data set and pull a value from there, right? So you might have a small table that has codes and a name, right? That you maintain in a separate table or a separate system. And so your main data set has a code. And now in the final data set, you want to include the translated name based on that code. And so you might use something like a lookup to do that. And so now we're going to go to the stages and use the lookup. Bring that in. Right. And so now you can see, hey, it's fanning things around because it says the lookup by default, you're going to want that to run fast. And so I'm going to run in parallel. Right. And so doesn't, that was a good example as to what you might do here in Transformer. I'm going to show you this and set this back to default parallel, right? And you'll see those icons become circles, right? So that's how you can tell inside a DataStage flow, what's my data doing between the parallel executions, the names of the links. When you run it, you'll see the counts and so on and so on, right? Lots of information available to you. All right, and so now what we're going to do is it has you double click the interest rate. All right, and this is MongoDB, so you see some different things. Oh, and actually, what I'll do here, I missed that step. I'm going to connect it to my lookup. Now you see that's a little bit different, right? A lookup, what that indicates is that's not a primary link. And what that means is, depending on the stage, that can mean different things. But what that means is, in this case, all of the records from the primary link will be included in the output of the lookup. Only the ones that I select based on a possible match to the lookup will be included on the output as well, right? So it's a dash line here. This is a lookup line. So double click DS interest rate. Now, because I added that, it knows this isn't, some of the stages can be either sources or targets. And once you assign, do I have something going in or something going out? Then it knows, okay, this is either a source or a target, right? So that's how it knows. And then the properties you have available to you change. So now I'll go to output, has you click edit. Then it wants you to delete the ID column, right? So I'll select that column and then click delete. Okay, and then it has a supply and return. And then click save, right? So now I have no ID. I have, a beginning and ending range. But a lookup, unlike a join, allows us to do some flexible matching of, how do I look up the values? How do I associate the value from the lookup to the primary? So now I'll double click the lookup. And you can see it does have a different look and feel. All right, and so then in this case, oops, and I missed the key column of the transformer stage, I'm assuming, right? So, and that's because I'm following through and making mistakes, which isn't ideal for a webinar. It is a good way to show you how you can do different things, right? So look up failure, I can say apply a range, right? And so I can say apply the range to email address, which was the key. But so if I scroll down, you'll notice in the instructions, though, it says apply range and select credit score, right? And I don't see credit score. So what I have to do is go back to my previous section, and I can see right away in task number 5 and the letter K that I did miss that, right? So while it says apply range, email address was still the key because we set that as the output key of the join on ID, and it carried through by default. And so join on email, that key totally works. When I get to transformer 1, I missed a step, but by default, because it says apply a range, it looks at, hey, here's what you said was the key. And so here's the key column, and I didn't scroll over it to see that, well, email address was the key, so it says that's got to be the key still, right? You didn't tell me otherwise. And so when I click on credit score as the key, and then say save and return. Now for the lookup, now if I scroll down and say, okay, now apply the range to, now I get credit score, and that's what I want. And so now if I go to the reference links, right, I only have link 11, which is my lookup. And then here's where it has you now defined. So let me scroll back to that section. And hopefully I won't miss anything again. But what I want to say is the credit score, right, from the primary link, the credit score, which is what we selected here, is going to be less than or equal to. And then on the lookup, ending limit. and then greater than or equal to the starting limit. Right, and so now it's giving me like a range, a between statement, effectively, where I can say the credit score from the primary. If it's between this on the lookup, then that's a match, right? And so then on the output tab of the lookup, what'll happen is it'll say, okay, based on your lookup, I'm assuming you want to include wherever there's a match, you want to include everything on the lookup. Right. And so what they do is say, okay, look, we're using the starting and ending limits to actually find the match. We don't need those downstream. And so get rid of them. Apply and return and save. And then task number 8 is where we are now. And so for task number 8, what it's having us do is go to the properties, and that now we've got a lot more information. So if I look at the input, the columns that are included now, right? I get a bunch of them. We get our total debt, which is one we created. We get rate, which is the new one from the lookup, and so on. But what it's having you do is go to properties and change the name, right? So now this file doesn't represent what it did before, not just mortgage data, right? It has a lot more information in it. So it has you change the name to mortgage applicants and interest rates. Create data set was already selected, so we'll leave it. And then, they have you navigate the properties. Now, depending on the file format, you get a lot of different properties, right? So in the case of sequential, it's a text file. So first line has column names. You might want that in text file, and that was already selected. But I have some flexible formats here where I can say, okay, you're going to create a Parquet file that maybe I'm going to use downstream. Maybe what I'm going to do is put it on my Cloud Object Store bucket. I'm going to import it into something else, right, that supports reading from Parquet files, which are compressed and carry a schema with them. Okay. In this case, I'm going to leave sequential, but if I select Parquet, right, then now I get settings that are very specific to Parquet formats and in not for text files. I'll switch it back to sequential. Okay, click save. Okay. So now what it has you do is run it, right? So we added a lot of different things here. Move this over a little bit, right? So we can see everything nicely, fit it to the screen. I'm going to click run. You can see that little asterisk, if I can say it, that little star indicates there are changes. I'll click run, and what's going to happen is it did everything, saved it. Now it's compiling it, and then after runs it. And then what this flow will do at the end, right? We'll be able to track the rows that have come through, but this flow now is going to take from DB2 warehouse 2 different tables and join them together. The output is an inner join with information from both. It's going to filter to a specific state, similar to a where clause, and it reduced the number of rows. It's going to join based on a Postgres database to get the credit score based on the person's email address. It's going to continue, and then it's going to continue and execute our transformer stage, which will then create a total debt, right? So it's going to take a look at the columns. We could do a variety of things. All we're doing there really is saying, okay, based on the information from the credit score, I'm going to now create a column called total debt, pull in the credit rate. I'm going to use that with a MongoDB table that I've got, or a document that I have there. And now what I'm going to do is match on those where I have a match. It's going to now give me a rate that it tags on the end. right? We can view the log. I can see the different sections, right? The different stages. When you see sections like this, what that indicates is the name stage, which we saw there was a mortgage applications 1, the comma 0 and comma 1, that those are two different sections that are going to execute in parallel. And so I get what's called a partition 0 and partition 1. Right? And I can track it all the way through to the end. Right? And I can see here the filter state code. The two different sections when it ran the where clause did filter. And then finally in my sequential file, I do see 69 records were exported successfully, none rejected. So I can track it all the way through. I can also take a look at the metrics and so on and so on. But anyway, so now task number 9 has us, what do we do with this, right? So if I go back to data integration, and now I should see 6 assets because we said create that asset we didn't delete our previous. So we'll have the mortgage data CSV still there. It'll be static. Let me click on refresh here. Okay. Maybe I missed resetting that created data asset, which could be. Let me make sure. Because I switched to the Parquet file, so it may have. Nope, it says created data asset. Okay. Okay. I think I missed anything there. All looks appropriate. Let me preview the data, see if it did create that file. Okay. So when I preview that file, that does tell me that it didn't actually create the file. No, I didn't get an error there. And that is interesting. Preview here. Just to make sure that the connections here are working. Okay. It is. Unless I missed something on the lookup. Okay. Okay. So this I probably missed in looking at that, right? So if there's a lookup failure, although ideally in the demo data there would be a lookup failure, what do you want to do, right? Typically you want to continue, right? So I'm going to continue. What that would mean is if I don't have a lookup, what do I want to do downstream, right? The value for rate, do I want it to be null? Or do I want to drop the rows and produce an error? Now, if you expect there always to be a lookup match, maybe you do want to leave it as fail. That didn't cause the error in our case. I'm gonna say save. And well, let's try compiling again. Okay, let's run the flow. Taking a little while to run here. Hopefully that's good. Could mean there's some trouble reading from the tutorial data sources. I'm not sure. We're getting something now.
Gabe, I am going to take this little minute to jump in because we do have some people joining us live. I've been watching the questions and chats coming in
Oh,
with the live,
okay.
and
Yeah.
I don't see anything right now, but just if you are joining us live, I'm watching those, so you can go ahead and drop your comments or questions in there, and I'll make sure to ping them over to Gabe. So like I said, we have people watching us live as well, and I'm just watching those comments coming in.
Okay. So this time it did run successfully. I don't know what happened the first time. That's kind of the way webinars go, with live demonstrations, I suppose. What I'll do is I'll preview that sequential file just to make sure. Let's see if I can. Where's my, there it is, repeat data. If it worked, there you go. Okay, so now we see data. Right, so in a sequential file, here's something interesting, right, that was added later that lets do a sort of a formatted preview, right, where things are nice. You get kind of a different presentation here where you can say, okay, how do I want things presented from a text file standpoint, right? If you want to see how things actually look, right, you might want to format things very specifically yourself, versus having a sort of hey, you figure things out and display things that look like dates as dates and so on, right? You might want to see what the raw data looks like. So anyway, that's it. So now if I click back on the data integration project, I should have my new data set. Now we should have 6. And I do, which is good. And so now if I click on the new CSV file, right, we get kind of that same previous look and feel. I've got 26 columns, 41 rows, which we know from the flow output that that's the right number of rows. Right, and I can navigate through, navigate through and see what the different values look like. Here's total debt, right? You can see we made that a double. And so I've got, it in a CSV file, it of course becomes text, but it does show me that a double had greater precision than was necessary. I could have previewed the data and set that more appropriately, but there you go. Right, so now the rest of the tasks, right? The next task is now what we're doing inside the other tasks. So now we've demonstrated data integration, right? And so now what do you do with that data? Well, in Cloud Pack for Data, you can use it then downstream. And so you can now say, hey, here's what I want to do. I want to create what's called a catalog. I'm going to store various items, right? So I'll store these banking items inside a separate catalog. And so you have the concept of, and you saw when I clicked on the CSV itself, I might want to do things like apply policies that could, help me determine the quality of this data, right? So the data quality tab, I can classify the data and do things like interrogate and run certain predefined data quality metrics, or what's called dimensions. Check for things like columns that contain nulls and so on. I can profile the data and give me stats on that data so that I can use that additionally downstream, or if I'm doing something with this data, a data scientist or something like that, I can look at, which give me the most discrete values, and what are the max and mins, what are the, things like that. Frequency distributions. So if I click on data quality, you can see it said, hey, you didn't run any sort of enrichment. To do data quality, you really have to do that. So I can do things like kick them off here. You have the ability to, depending on your other services and what you have access to, if I click on new asset, right, I'll get a variety of things that I can do. And I could also kick off enrich data assets here. And I won't show you that because this isn't part of the tutorial for this one. If you track through the series of tutorials, you do actually have where you're enhancing data sets and so on, assigning quality, reviewing things, and you can absolutely take a look at those. What they have you do here is then create a catalog and publish it. Right, and so inside, right, I'll have in my navigation menu, I have a section, various sections that organize the services. I have a section for catalogs. Inside here, right, I could organize catalogs. You get a default catalog, a platform asset catalog, certain things that facilitate services talking to each other. The default catalog is where I would maybe gear services that require a catalog to do things like communicate, where I apply now my data classification so that it can properly see if a masking policy should apply. Things like data virtualization use that, right? So I would set a default catalog, probably default, and then say, okay, I'm going to create, or different teams creating masking policies. In generically speaking, hey, if I have a social security number and you're an underprivileged user, not one of the following groups, not the owner of the asset that was imported into the catalog, then you need to apply this masking, and here's how that masking goes. And they can be complex, right? Where it does a similar pattern so that people can analyze the data, but not actually see or reverse to find out who that person was, the original data set, right? Original value. So I can apply those to services that are within the platform that have that understanding, like data virtualization. But what I'll do is, and they have you create a new catalog, right? And so they have you create a mortgage approval catalog. Right? So you can make the name whatever you want, but we'll make it that. And then what they do is they have you, I think, set data protection rules. And so you can see you make a decision at the beginning. A lot of these you can set afterwards. But for protection rules, right, because that's a security enforcement, you have to make that decision right away. And so they have you, in this case, say, okay, I'm going to enforce it. It warns you again. It says, okay, look, you can't change this after. So are you sure? Here's this metadata reporting. And you can see in the case of catalogs, I said, by default, that's off. The reason that's off is you might want to restrict who can see the information about the metadata for this catalog. So that goes into a database. And when you put it in the database, it synchronizes, but the database controls from a security standpoint are up to you. And so by default, it's off, right? Maybe you don't want people knowing the assets you have, or the metadata assigned to those assets might give too much information. You want to secure that. So by default, you turn that off, have to make a decision, but you can set that. Duplicate asset handling, right? What do you want to do by default? So update the original asset, but you could even say, hey, look, I could have the same name table from different locations or the same name files, right? If I can tell if it's part of the path, becomes different. But, what do you want to do? Allow duplicates probably isn't what you want to do. Well, how do you want to, when you remove, do you want to have a safety like recover from trash, or do you want to remove it immediately? But I'll say create, right? So it'll create that catalog. And then in task 10, right, just wrapping this up, what it's going to have us do is actually publish that information into this new catalog, right? So you can see right now I don't have anything here. And what I can do inside a catalog, right? So this is where I could go, okay, in a catalog, this is where business users are going to come in. They're going to see information. They're going to search They're going to find the assets that we have in our environment, right? Decide what they want to use, how they want to use it, whatever they're doing with it, right? And so here I can, you can say I can override some of the things, right? I can't modify enforcement, right? So that's why it warned you at the beginning. Here I could say, you know what? I said no at the beginning, but now I'm going to say, yep, report on the asset metadata within this catalog. If I add something into this catalog, how do I want, in the project you saw on when I clicked data quality, it said, hey, you didn't do any profiling, you didn't do any enriching, so I can't show you data quality. Do you want that to present to end users that way? Probably not. And you'd want to control this typically. But if you do introduce something into the catalog, do you want it to automatically do a little sampling and create a basic profile for you so they see something? Probably, right? So anyway, those are defaults. You have an access control setting. And here's where I could say, okay, look, in this catalog, the following users can go in and see information, and here's how they can see it, right? So I could add users or groups and assign a role. But I created the catalog, so I become the admin. And I've got nothing in here currently, right? And so you can add into a catalog as well. And when you add into the catalog, I can add local files or import from databases and so on and skip a project. But within a project, that's where I can perform work, like adding my specific data quality, enriching that data the way that I need, depending on your enterprise and the rules within. But I can do things like establish even my own lineage mappings, right? So there are ways to do that inside a project as well, depending on the services. Like you can leverage the Manta integration and produce some savvy, import automatically some savvy lineage based on data sources that appear here to a business user, or you can even use your own sort of a custom CSV mapping style to say, okay, look, this column goes to this column, and I'm going to call it the following because we have a custom application that I know, controls bringing that data from the source to the target. Here we use DataStage flow, so you'd probably do it within a project and use the IBM's data lineage to pull that in automatically for you. But what I'm going to do is go to data integration. And now what I can say is, hey, I've got the following assets. I'm going to take this asset and I'm going to publish it to the catalog as is. Right. And so I think that's what they have you do here. Default catalog, go to publish. So it's mortgage. Okay. So when I do that, right, I'll publish to the catalog. And now, depending on what I have access to from a catalog standpoint, I would see more or less here. Now, we just created this one 3 minutes ago, so this is the one we want to use. It's a little drop down, so you can see the description, right? But I'll say next. Now I can immediately say, okay, navigate into the catalog after I do this. But I can set things like a description. Here's where I could add some tags, you know, whatever those are. Right, that just makes it easier to I can define rules on tags, I can search on tags, I can do things like that, right? So I'll leave it as mine. And what do I want to do if it already exists? And how do I want to set the privacy for this asset? Right? And if it's private, then I control the individual access for this asset entirely, right? So I can give somebody access inside that catalog to preview, but maybe not to certain assets. Or you can just pick up the default for the catalog itself, right? And so then I'll publish. And now it tells me, here's what I'm doing, right? When it completes. And so now if I refresh this catalog, there you go, right? So now recently added, and depending on what I've been doing, it'll tell me, hey, here are some things you haven't looked at that you might want to look at. I can do crowdsourced ratings and things like that. And so I can go, okay, show me the highly rated items. I only have one asset in this catalog, so no point. But if I click on that, now I could see, okay, here's the privacy, the type, information about it. I can see, if I assign tags, I don't know why my tag doesn't show there right now. But I'll say mine, right? We'll apply that tag, right? And so then that tag appears. All right, but so now once it's done, right, I've got a variety of things inside my catalog that I can navigate to, and we really don't have a whole lot of time, but now I can preview the asset. Now this depends on the settings that I have as a user inside this catalog and how the asset was set. Do I have a connection back to it? How's the security handled and so on? So you may or may not be able to see the asset. Masking rules may be applied because I said enforce the data protection rules. Now, if I click profile, right, you'll see automatically it now doesn't say, hey, somebody needs to enrich this and republish. I told it, hey, look, if it doesn't have a profile, just do a sampling and create a basic profile. And so it will. Lineage, right? So I only have one asset inside this catalog, but this is where if I did IBM's data lineage, it might pull automatically information as to how data flows to or from this. Or I could, say, okay, I want to add my own custom mapping. I have multiple, nothing that supports importing lineage information. So I'll just create it myself. Data quality, nothing here yet, right? So I would have to assign some sort of means for it to track data quality, do an evaluation data quality. Individual access, right? I said this was, public, so it's whatever the catalog has, and so on, right? The review is my crowdsourced rating, right? So I can make a review and say, something, right? But I can do my Google style, let's give it some stars and track that. All right, and so now I go back to my mortgage approval catalog. I can say, hey, show me the highly rated. And of course, it's only one person, so it hasn't shown there yet, but it would. And I can see my tag is mine, right? So now if I search and said, okay, show me mine in my enterprise search, right? My global searching capabilities that I have within the platform, and anyone can use based on my permission, it would say, okay, look, I found a tag and I could filter this and say, okay, what type do I want? I get into advanced filtering and so on. But you can see I can search on tags. And this is where I could go, okay, take me right to that asset if it, yep, that's the right one. So let me add it to a project or just click on it and I'll go right to it. Right. So a lot of capabilities, a lot of ways you can get in and out and around. Profile might have been created. Wasn't a lot to the CSV. There you go. Right. So now I can see it said it took a guess at the type based on the data within it. It said, okay, this looks like it's an identifier because it's pretty discrete. And it gives me a confidence score and so on, right? Apply it online. Well, it only saw 2, no and a yes. So that's probably a Boolean style. And so on and so on, right? So now I can do things like take a look, max and min, see stats, right? Still not quality information because I'd have to assign that, but you can see how the profile works and gives you information about it, right? I could make a change here if I wanted to and update the profile depending on my permission. Go, whoop, you got it close, but not quite right. But of course, the enriched doing the data enrichment within the project itself gives you a very, very comprehensive and complete data quality profile. So anyway, I think, Joy, that's it. I know I took more time than I think I was supposed to.
I feel like that was really informative, so I'm here for it. Um, Thank you so much, all of you joining us live. Thank you as well. I don't see any questions remaining, so I'm going to close it out for the day. But once again, thank you so much, Gabe, and everyone have a good afternoon.
All right.